Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. Here on The Point of View, we pick the right topics, get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. Tonight, we'll be looking at Ghana's digitalization agenda, spearheaded by the Vice President, His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. It's been on for a few years. We'll be reviewing how well it's going. We'll try and understand how that fits into the government's overall development strategy. We'll find out what's working and what's not working. I have a very special guest who's not just an activist, actually a technology entrepreneur who's done some innovative products in the healthcare space and in other spaces. Bryce Simmons will be talking to me tonight as we review 3 or 4 years of the digitalization agenda. Stay with us. Welcome back. So tonight we are continuing our series, which is trying to preview the year. We already began with a political preview. We also looked at Africa and geopolitics and spent a bit of time discussing the economy. Today we want to look at the digital agenda spearheaded by the Vice President in particular for 2 reasons. Because yesterday there was a front page story in the Business and Financial Times in the bottom right corner. Digital reforms are necessary for building a vibrant economy. And this story came from a program he attended at the University of Ghana, a story written by Citi, and it basically, just a few paragraphs, says the realization of a strong and vibrant economy is dependent on the country's ability to build solid systems and institutions on the back of the ever-increasing digital transformation being witnessed globally. I'm sure you've heard some people say the Vice President used to be the economic messiah. Why is he now talking about digital issues? Well, he says there's a connection that you can't develop an economy without a proper appreciation of digitalization and making the economy digitally ready. So for him, it's the same thing. So indeed, on the 2nd of November 2021, he gave what many consider a seminal speech, transforming an economy through digitalization, the Ghana story. It was a long speech, after which he had a chat with Patrick Ewua, a very respected education entrepreneur, who questioned him on his digital plan. He was also questioned by students. It was over a 3-hour program. Some of the highlights from that event I will show you as the basis for what you consider maybe the MPP government's digital manifesto. It has a number of points. So we've put out, or we've managed to glean about 16 projects under this digital agenda, and then 8 thematic areas. And my guest will help us break down what's really working and what's not. So some of the things he mentioned in the Ashesi speech: issuance of biometric national ID. We know there's the Ghana card. That's probably at the center of all of this. The digital address system, which was executed initially by Ghana Post and a company called Vocacom, and then there was LUSPA, the Land Use and Special Planning Authority, also coming in there. Then there's mobile money interoperability. Then there's the universal QR code payment system as part of the projects. Central bank digital currency, the ECD, coming up. Some of these have not yet been done. Then there's the digitalization of the passport office, of the ports of the DVLA. There's also something called the birth and death digitalization, the Ghana.gov platform, digitalization of the tax filing process, National Common Platform for Property Tax Administration, NHIA, e-pharmacy, which is digitalization of pharmacies in Ghana. Then free Wi-Fi to secondary schools, 46 colleges of education, district education offices, and universities. Indeed, the program at which he made this comment I read in the BNFT, it was actually a program at the University of Ghana at a laptop award ceremony and launching of the One Student, One Laptop initiative, which is then part of this overall agenda. So you have him assisting the Vice Chancellor, presenting a laptop to a student. Then there's digitalizing of the Lands Commission, registering all cocoa farmers and their farms, digitalization of fertilizer, etc., etc. So these are some of the things they want to do. He also lists what he calls his 8-point agenda for digital development. So number one, a system with unique identification numbers for the population. I'll put this on the screen for you to see. A system which addresses with addresses for all properties and locations in Ghana. That's number 2. 3, a system that is transparent and promotes accountability, discipline, and trustworthiness. That's number 4. A system that's inclusive and not based on who you know. A system that provides efficient public services, delivery, and tackles corruption. A system that improves efficiency in the health and educational sectors. A system that provides financial inclusion and a cashless economy. And a system that enhances domestic revenue mobilization and tax collection. So those are the 8 criteria he has for an economy that is ready to leverage the digital dividend. So who's my guest? Bryce Simmons. Bryce Simmons is the founder of M-Pedigree. He is also, I call him a part-time activist because he's honorary vice president of Imani. And he's also a conference speaker. What else are you?
Rabble rouser is what I've heard lately.
Well, it helps the conversation. But I need people to know that you've been interested in technology for a very long time.
Indeed.
Not only in terms of activism and writing about that, actually practicing. So that the M-Pedigree and the Gold Keys platform is almost like your work as a technology person. And how is that going?
Indeed. Well, it's going well in some countries, much more difficult in other countries. Africa is very difficult as an integrated market. So we find out that when we're doing well in other places, we're doing less well elsewhere.
When did you get interested in Dr. Bawumia's digital agenda? In my view, he's probably the few vice presidents who's been given a bit of space to lead something very meaningful.
I was,
right?
Yes, initially it was quite exhilarating, right? It was, the feeling was one of initial shock, right? Like someone will elevate digitalization to such a high profile. And then, as he persisted, it was quite, it tended to intrigue. And then over time, I became more cynical. So the initial excitement that you have such a high profile promoter of something that has long been marginalized in our part of the world, technology and the prospects that it holds for our development, has not always received the best attention from the powerful. So to have somebody that powerful make it more or less his flag mast, was very, very inspiring. And I was continually impressed until it became clear to me that Dr. Bawumia appeared to have latched on this to appeal to a youthful audience, to create a new narrative that will make him stand apart from other politicians. And while that is not necessarily bad, I felt a bit betrayed because it looked like it was primarily political PR as opposed to a genuine commitment to the policy of using digitalization to transform Ghana and the way we do public service.
Isn't it a bit harsh if you consider the sheer number of projects that we've mentioned? At least, I counted at least 15, if not more. That should count for something that under this government, ID card, universal QR code, MMI, passport, all kinds of things going on. Should you not give a bit of credit to the fact that even if it's for branding purposes, some things are actually happening which will eventually help the country?
Yeah, over the last 2 decades, Ghana, compared to its peers, has done fairly well in digitalization. And, the digital economy in Ghana, compared to its peer countries, hasn't been too bad. We've seen significant. We've increased mobile penetration. The number of people that have mobile phones have gone up from about 2% to now in excess of 100 and something percent if you consider the double subscriptions. But at the very least, I bet at least 80% to 90% of people have at least one SIM card. So that is huge improvement. Even in respect of landlines and broadband, where we haven't done too well, we've done better than the average African country. So I don't deny that there's been improvement. I don't think it's certainly been improvement that you can limit only to the Dr. Bawumia era, though in some respects, they've been quite successful. So in national identification, the total number of people that have received national ID cards have been the highest since we started going electronic with ID systems. When you think of mobile money interoperability, the speed at which it was deployed under the current administration has been faster than in previous attempts. You all know the famous situation with the previous contract for mobile interoperability that ended up in arbitration. So there are bright spots. The problem is that taken as a whole, it is not transformative. And in some respects, it's actually quite problematic. There are instances where I fear that because it's so hyper-branded and it's so, the political stakes are so high because of the way it's being charged, many people are careful, scrutinizing developments in the sector in order to push for real reform and true improvement. Because if you do that, it appears as if you are taking on Dr. Bawumia, and not many people want to take on a certain vice president. So I think in that respect, it's been actually quite sinister, because so many things that we could have put an emphasis on and ensure that we fix them are still lingering and are still causing problems. And obviously, in the course of the conversation, I will delve into them.
Let's start with the 8-point agenda that I think his Ashesi speech outlined.
Yes.
I don't know what you made of that. Patrick Ewua inviting. Patrick Ewua is probably the poster boy for a returnee who's doing something developmental. Ashesi is highly respected. So it looks like a nicely organized event. I watched it, it was very long.
And Patrick himself is a technologist. Patrick worked for Microsoft, with which I'm also affiliated in some capacity, for many, many years. And of course, Patrick is someone that I know and respect deeply. I think that the feeling was, digital is linked to innovation, and Ashesi has an innovation agenda. Ashesi believes that not only is innovation critical to helping us address some of the age-old problems in corruption, we talk about corruption, efficiency, etc. Innovation is also how we're going to grow the economy. And digital has become increasingly intertwined with innovation. So a lot of people talk of innovation, they think of the role of digital. And with the current convergence, what we call the convergence, every other sector, whether it's in biotech, whether it's in nanotech, whether it's in nuclear engineering, with regard of the field you think of, there is a digitization ongoing. So for that reason, if you think of transformation, you can't seriously divorce it from
innovation,
from digital innovation. And I think that is why that speech was considered important. But as I said, you can approach it with this very forward-looking, very progressive, mindset, and then you can also look at it very realistically and say, how committed is Dr. Bawumia to an actual digital agenda, to an actual transformation program? And that is where people like myself, who are also activists in our outlook, tend to have problems.
Good. So he gives an 8-point agenda, which we will analyze. Just to run through quickly again. So a system with a unique identification number, or a system with unique identification numbers for the population. A system with addresses for all properties and locations. A system that's transparent and promotes accountability, discipline, and trustworthiness. An inclusive system not based on who you know. A system that provides efficient public services, delivery, and tackles corruption. That improves efficiency in the health and education sectors, provides financial inclusion and a cash-light economy, that enhances domestic revenue mobilization. So these are the 8 pillars of his digital manifesto. Taken together, what do you make of this?
No, it's fascinating because those are also the very areas where in recent times we've had big case studies which tell us whether or not the government is genuinely committed to these very lofty ideals. And so I find that fascinating for that score. So it looks like it was very well chosen. And maybe unfortunately for the vice president, we also have enough evidence in those particular areas to question the commitment. And hopefully in questioning the commitment, we hope for a change in the approach that he's taking. We are not just criticizing for criticizing's sake. We have very clear views about how he can change the tack and return to the lofty approach that initially characterized his involvement in the digital economy and the policies.
So you used 2 words which I want to interrogate. You said initially you were fascinated, but you realized that it's not transformative enough, and then some are quite problematic. So it's almost like the degeneration of emotion from fascination to skepticism to almost cynicism. So what's the criteria for analyzing these many projects and this 8-point agenda? What criteria are you going to use?
I think one, policy coherence is important. And from almost all the big matters that we are talking about, there are internal contradictions that fuel the cynicism. It's almost as if they genuinely were doing this in good faith, you shouldn't see this.
I get you.
So we have a number of major case studies about the digital agenda where it's quite clear that if the vice president and his policy advisory team, as well as the government, of course, were genuinely committed to digital transformation, they wouldn't do things that way. So that's number one, policy coherence.
So if there's an incoherence in the policy,
or a contradiction in terms of objective versus actual practice,
I get it.
The second one is to look at our lost potential, which is where we had so much potential, and then all of a sudden we are not realizing that potential. That is one of the ways in which one will usually become skeptical over time or lose an initial fascination for something, right?
What do you mean by that?
So you start off with something, and then the thing seems to be, highly promising. It's going to be great, and then over time you don't see that greatness. You actually start getting diminishing returns.
So underutilized capacity.
It's an example. If you have capacity that you've developing, and initially, therefore, that made people extremely positive. And then all of a sudden, you're not using that capacity. Or all of a sudden, you're not seeing those returns. Or, that is one of the ways in which usually people lose hope in the likely success of an activity.
I see. So policy incoherence, lost potential. So that's your framework for analyzing this. Is there anything else in that?
Well, there are two other, should I call them gauges or measures, which in the course of the conversation become apparent.
I get. Okay, so you are saying that there are case studies of policy incoherence in the period that the government has tried to implement the digital agenda.
Well, we've been implementing the digital agenda for a long time.
What's the best example? What's the most immediate example of that?
We've been implementing the digital agenda for a long time. Between 2007 to 2014, the World Bank gave us $100 and something million. We spent about $80 million of it doing something called e-transform.
Yes.
Most of the things you see today are linked somewhat to e-transform, including the famous e-services framework that we like to talk about. So Ghana.gov is a direct output of the e-services.
E-transform.
No, e-services, which was an output of e-transform. So we've been doing this for a while, but then the government decided to raise it to the level of a profile and to a level of importance and priority that we've not seen before in a long time. So that was significant. And now the question is, going forward, do we have the evidence to justify that they do have that commitment? So, a big example will be the ongoing SIM registration, where we've had amazing contradictions at every level. So first of all, the government says its policy is to integrate databases and ensure that we have a national identification infrastructure that will stop things like creating confusion among agencies. This one collecting data here, this one collecting another data, and you end up spending more money, etc., etc. Now you have a situation where the National Identification Authority purports to be the lead regulator of all identification matters in the country. And you have the NCA.
But I think that's backed by law. It's not a proportion. I think the law says that.
Well, fine. We will grant them that. Yes. Though, of course, if you break things down into greater and greater complexity, it depends on what you mean. But that's fine. So they are the National Identification Authority, and you are trying to register people and ensure that you link their SIM card to the identity properly. So naturally, in such an exercise, you have an interagency coordination issue.
Yeah.
What did we discover? What we discovered was because the NIA primarily has become extremely beholden to private commercial interests, because the way they designed the national identity architecture as a public-private partnership, which was not bad, it was a great idea. But they had some difficulty thinking through the cost implications. There's nothing wrong having a commercial strategy to back a public interest agenda because it can help with sustainability. So PPPs are great. But when you are doing that, you have to bear in mind that overall cost will have an effect on whether or not you can actually deliver on public interest. So because of that, the NIA typically operates with half its mind on the commercials. We think that there is too much emphasis on the commercial that is beginning to interfere with the ability to look purely at the public interest. So when they were approached about how to achieve the integration of the national identity database with the communications effort that was underway, my reading of what we've been able to unearth so far is that both the NCA and the NIA were completely subservient to commercial interests and were not thinking right. They were not thinking along public interest lines. So the NIA tried to create the impression that there is no way NCA could, do this verification thing unless it made money. If you read it carefully, the interactions that they were having. So they said, for instance, the simple issue on the table was you want people to connect their SIM cards to their ID cards. We are going to create a mechanism whereby through USSD, people will indicate interest in re-registration. And obviously now they've made it mandatory. Can they also send their PIN, and then we check their PIN being the PIN of the national ID card, and then we check with their surname and their PIN correspondence, compare the data that you have with the data they are given that is associated with their SIM card to see if there is parity. That sounds like a very sensible, straightforward thing to do, because NIA has spent time not only collecting people's ID data information, but in some respects, it's also even collected people's SIM information during registration. So if you send me the PIN, and you say, here is a SIM number, here is a PIN, does that correspond? They should just be able to come back to you and say, yeah, it corresponds. Why do you need people queuing up in the sun
to take their metrics again? If policy coherence was to be attained, the issue of integration to be attained, there's no reason why NIA and NCA should be seen to be working at cross purposes.
Indeed. So my argument is that because they were being primarily driven by commercial interests, they could not keep their eye on the public interest and take the most rational, most efficient decisions. So with this back and forth, Kelly GVG then saw the window to say, oh, we don't even have to waste your time with these people. We will just provide an app that will do exactly this. NIA then start to write to various stakeholders trying to suggest that what the NCA is doing is illegal. That the data that is being collected for future verification cannot happen that way, because NIA must be part of the initial collection. But being part of the initial collection also meant that you have to pay for it. Now, if they were being purely a public interest organization, the costs will not be that high. But because they're operating with private and commercial interests behind them, every time they bring a bill, it's too high. So when they decide that they want to charge you half a CD for every time you do a verification, and you tally that up, and it goes to something close to $4 million, immediately, and you want to put all that cost on private sector, the telecoms and their interests also starts now to converge with the Kelvin GVG side of the thing, and not the NIA. Though, of course,
so this is your first evidence of policy incoherence leading to an inefficiency. We'll take a break. This is the point of view. We're trying to analyze the digitalization agenda of the government. By Simmons is my guest, and we'll delve into other projects as well. The first one, of course, being the most high profile, the re-registration of SIMs. But there are other issues, e-levy inclusive. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight, my guest is By Simmons. We are trying to analyze the digitalization agenda of the government, spearheaded by the Vice President. By Simmons says initially he was fascinated. Then he felt that the digital agenda was not transformative. Now he's concerned that some of the issues are incoherent in terms of policy, and we are not actually working in the public interest. So yes, NCA, NIA could have worked better together. They could have made this more simpler, achieved the role of integration. But there's a lot of projects. I mentioned about 17 projects that the government wants to do. Obviously, you can't use one example to say that means that the agenda is not working. Yes,
but most of these are flagship or highly important. So the SIM card registration thing, for instance, has dominated the headlines now for almost a month. That tells you the degree of public interest. The national addressing system, which the Vice President mentioned as one of the key successes, is actually not that of a success, if you look at it very carefully. Even when Google had made this plus code system available for free, and if you didn't want to use the Google model, you can go to the source, the core source of these systems, and then build an open source implementation that you wish to use. We don't do that. Rather, we decide that we're going to get a commercial solution and then deploy the commercial. Okay, fine. Now we've spent that money. We've created this national addressing system. We are going around trying now to deliver a value proposition for it. Because the truth of the matter is that if somebody wants to come to your location and deliver a parcel to you, it depends on the app they are using that will help them with navigation.
So I'm at Citi FM. If you are coming from Latevi or Koshi to Citi FM,
it depends on who is coming. So if, for instance, if it's Glovo or Uber or Bolt or whatever it is that is coming to you, that will determine how they get there. So they will plug into the most widely used geolocation system to get to you, right?
Which is Google.
Which is Google or any other service that the app they are using is connected to. None of those major platforms that are used for navigation in this country is plugged directly into the Ghana GPS thing, because it doesn't make sense, right? So if you are using Uber, Bolt, Glovo, Jumia, whatever it is that you are using, whatever app you are using, will not necessarily go and connect to the Ghana Post GPS, right? So let's say you decide that, okay, I'm going to give you my Ghana Post GPS address. That entity must go and download the Ghana Post GPS address and substitute it for what it has already got. What is the benefit of that?
So in this case, what should they have done?
What they should have done is decide what it is that they want to do.
If they want to give Citi FM a digital address. No. They don't want to use Citi FM as a name. They want to use Citi FM so that the next door neighbor's digital address is also in the same. Maybe they don't want to use Mr. Kofi's pink house. Mm-hmm. So if you are coming to the house after Citi FM, they want a code that if you are coming there is a specific place you are coming to.
First of all, it's unnecessary because, as I've said, if the person is going to navigate to the place using geolocation information, then that system itself will make that happen. So maybe what you want to do is increase the absorption of that type of solution in your economy.
So you are saying they shouldn't have even done the
in the fact, it was not very useful, right?
Okay.
Given that if I'm coming to your end, it depends on what kind of location system I'm using. The number itself is useless. If you give a villager 0.177 or 0.177 something, and say that's your address, and that villager, and I'm using villager derogatorily, just somebody who lives in a village, that villager has that code as the address. What is the utility unless there's somebody bringing something to them or something like that? And that person bringing something to them needs some app to navigate to that location. So in the end, that is the only utility.
And the app doesn't recognize the GK.
Unless you can somehow force everybody in Ghana using any technology to come and plug into the Ghana Post GPS thing. Otherwise, the dominant platforms will not use your system. So that is basically putting the horse in front of the cart, right? So the question then was, okay, now you've gone ahead and you've spent all this money and you've done it. What do you move on to achieve? The only way you move on to make use of that system is if you embed the Ghana Post GPS system itself into a wide range of applications, so that at least in the government system, it's interconnected for a range of matters for which we have geospatial need, like land registration, a whole bunch of those things. And then, at least people that are using the government services will have utility. Rather than spend the money on that, you know what they spend the money on? They spend the money printing the codes on plaques to go and stick on houses. What is the point of that logic? How does it really contribute anything to stick some code on there? That
so people can know that this is your digital address.
No, but if I have a digital address and I want to communicate that digital address, it will be because of a particular utility. Somebody is doing something for me. Somebody is coming to my house. So why was there? Remember, but that code is arbitrary.
It's an address not useful in itself. That this is my digital address.
No, because this is an arbitrary code.
So it could be any code.
It could be anything randomly. So it has no meaning.
It doesn't mean anything except for the fact that a system must use it.
When you are walking by a road and you see Martin Loop, you are counting things like number 1 Martin Loop, number 7 Martin Loop. Oh, Martin Loop is adjacent to this other street. You are using that landmark system in your human navigation, like a bird would do, right? When you change that to geolocation, you shift it from human navigation to machine navigation. And now those arbitrary codes mean nothing except to the machine. So it's completely ridiculous to then spend money to go and print it and stick it there, as if that had a meaning as far as the navigational space was concerned.
Fine. So when he went to Ashesi, he then said they are talking to Google to now integrate the system.
Which makes no sense because Google has a free system called Plus Codes that countries like Nepal have adopted and are using for free to do the same thing.
So there's no need to even go to Google?
Well, you can go to Google, but then what is Google supposed to do with it? I don't get it. Google has a system. It's called Plus Codes. Okay. It does the same thing that you want to do. It has given it for free. It says every country that wants, they should come. Some countries have gone, they have used it, it's free. You said, no, you go and spend money and build your own thing. Now, somehow Google should come and incorporate your thing into their system. What is the point? So my point is that it's incoherent and it's confusing.
So that's the second example. So the Ghana Post GPS was not. What about medical drones? That has been given quite a bit of publicity. We've gotten coverage for it internationally, sending blood, anti-snake venom to rural places.
It's been a great branding exercise, and I admit that the country has earned some branding plaudits from it, and that is not invaluable. That's valuable. That's not non-valuable. That's valuable. But I think that let's go back to the original critique. The original critique was that it's too expensive for it to be a major part of how we move goods around. We said it costs, when you do your computation, maybe $20 per packet. Now, if you are moving medicine and stuff like that around, something that costs even $10 per item means that the vast majority of items you want to deliver are unprofitable. Because you know that how much does a box of paracetamol cost? How much does a pouch of blood cost? How much does a box of condoms cost? So when you have such high cost per unit, it already tells you that this is going to play a very small role in respect of matters where you have extreme urgency and lives are really at stake. You cannot be using it to transport ordinary commodities. It must only transport things that are so precious, given the time factor. Like snake serum, somebody has been bitten by a snake, 3 hours. So we said it should be used for emergency alone. On top of that, it should be used for places where, even for emergencies, that is because you cannot deploy a normal emergency response system like a motorcycle-based delivery system.
Okay.
The government didn't do that. Rather, they've gone ahead and built 4 major, actually I think now it's 6, distribution centers. You know what is fascinating about that? First, we have to take the goods, the medicines or whatever it is that is in the public system, the medicines, the other supplies, carry them to these distribution centers that are spotted all over the place. And then when you need the items, you send them a message and then they put it on a drone and catapult it to you. That is not necessarily a ridiculous idea if you are doing it for a very small amount of goods or services. Where on the other hand, you have a situation where your central medical stores is struggling to get vehicles to transport goods to your regional medical stores. And the regional medical stores are struggling to get cars to transport goods to your district medical stores. And you have an inventory system that is broken and therefore medical supplies are expiring and are getting lost in the system and we cannot do inventory reconciliation and the rest of it. That is not where you spend the money. So we advise the government that spend this money on a small emergency kind of plug-in and rather invest in revitalizing the current medical supplies distribution system. So here to your incoherence.
I think they opted for the sexier solution.
That has been a challenge.
Let's talk about mobile interoperability, because if you listen to the Vice President's speech, he says that when they assumed office, 70% of people in Ghana had no bank accounts, 80% of adult population had mobile phones. They realized that the mobile phone money market was growing, mobile money market was growing. So they wanted to implement what they call mobile money interoperability. And they did that initially with GIPS at the center of this. And then the Vice President makes a very interesting statement that achieving mobile money is small feature as we did it. The data shows that because of MMI, Ghana is the fastest growing mobile money market in Africa. And then it says banks are responding to a competition for the unbanked from the mobile money service providers. Then it says this was December. Next month, all banks in Ghana will launch a bank-wide mobile money wallet, which will be available to customers and non-customers through the mobile app. And then he also says that the payment system they are put in place is easy to open a traditional bank account. And then for an informal sector dominated by cash payments, most merchants are reluctant to accept other forms of payment. They've launched an universal QR code system. And then while QR code payments exist around the world, an universal QR code where all banks and mobile money service providers and fintechs are on one platform with interoperability between bank accounts and wallets is a rarity. Ghana is the first country in Africa to implement such a QR code payment system. And then they also talk about other things like digital currency and things. So on the mobile money side and the interoperability side, we can see the benefits.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that when it comes to the financial innovation segment of the whole digital economy, there's been quite some impressive developments, but we still have limitations. So, in the government, for instance, is taking credit for the boom in payments, and it's trying to suggest that that's all to do with mobile money interoperability, but that cannot be correct, right? Because if you look at current mobile money, which is the biggest segment, so we have maybe 130 billion transactions, and of that, we have like 3-point-something billion transactions. Of that, 3 billion of those transactions are mobile money transactions. And of the $130 billion or so of transactional value, about $110 billion of it is mobile money. So mobile money is the biggest chunk. But in mobile money also, on-net transactions are the biggest. So the transactions you do within MTN, the transactions you do within Vodafone are by far the biggest. So to attribute that growth to mobile money interoperability appears to suggest that they're not looking carefully at what is really happening, which sometimes I also have a problem with, because sometimes I see that they do diagnosis, and the diagnosis that they do are not always very well linked to the evidence. So if you have on-net transactions being by far predominant, you can't claim that the surge in payments are due to interoperability among operators. That's not correct. But that notwithstanding, it's a great thing that they've got interoperability done. The previous government tried to do the same PPP model, where rather than focus on public interest, it was driven by what the private entity, the contractor, could make. So they came up with this ridiculous amount that they were going to have to recover, and $1 billion that they were supposed to cover.
Something billion or something.
Ghana cedis, I think it was some very huge
4
amount.
billion cedis, yeah.
And the idea was that they were going to recover that money through fees. which is very similar to what they've done with the national ID card, which we have a problem with. So now that the government decided, no, let's just get a contractor to do it for the government, and then open that up to the other ecosystem players to interconnect. We've seen significant progress, and that's impressive. But we still have challenges. You still have issues where Gibbs, for instance, has this interconnectivity model that does not benefit a lot of the smaller players in the ecosystem. So getting access to the banking network in Ghana compared to countries that are doing open banking is still not very advanced. But I'll acknowledge that when it comes to fintech, generally Ghana is in the right direction.
So the digital payment infrastructure is working, which is why you and other people may think the e-levy could affect that. So even though we're giving credit for the growth in digital financial services generally, I think you've said in an article that the e-levy could erode some of that.
Yes, because by looking at payments and not looking at the digital economy in its entirety, you are doing the same policy incoherence thing that we are complaining about. So what it means is that you are not looking at what is it that is growing fastest. And a lot of that is basically informal activities where people are just using digital tools to drive that informal activity. So the famous wache, buying wache on WhatsApp or buying dresses that you saw on Instagram. A lot of that is digital commerce, but it's not digital commerce in the way that you can easily see in tax. Like you can see that Jumia is there, Glovo is there, and the rest of it. So what you have to be careful about is that you don't introduce new policies that entrenches that informal digitalization. So otherwise, digitalization or digital becomes another instrument or tool that drives informality. But you are trying to bring in digitalization to increase formalization of the economy. So don't introduce taxes that makes people feel that, oh, okay, actually I don't want to pay on an online platform because they will charge me. Rather, let me do the transaction on the online platform but pay offline by giving the money to an agent. So what is going to happen with the e-levy is they're going to see a lot of agents banking and agent services emerging because people want to evade the online tax. So if you exempt, let's say, internet banking, let's say you exempt internet banking, then you have the person that is sitting under the tree have an internet banking account, and then when you go to them, it says, don't do mobile money because it's expensive. I will transfer it from my internet banking application to the other person, and you will pay me off the table. So now what happens is that rather than the person discovering online services and then paying with Momo herself and over time using USSD to do commerce and things like that, they increasingly rely on agents because they want to evade the tax. And then you have an agent-driven ecosystem that does not nourish the growth of online services. So we are saying that pay attention to all those possibilities, model it, determine what should you exempt, what should you not exempt, how will, if you exempt this but not exempt this, how would that play? To give a very fascinating example, in the current model, quasi-government services are not exempted, what the government want to do. So if I am Cocoa Board and I want to pay farmers, all of a sudden my cost has increased because that is not considered paying government. But Cocoa Board is a quasi-government service, it's a public service. So if you're going to charge me for using mobile money to give to the farmers, it affects my cost. Maybe some investments I was going to make in digital, I'm not going to make them any further because all of a sudden I realize that my costs are going up. And those kinds of issues, because we don't carefully think through the implications. And why don't we think through the implications? We have an echo chamber kind of policy making. All the people in the room are in one party. All of them are beholden to the president because he appointed them and they want to please the president. So nobody's in the room asking hard questions. There's almost no serious policy debate. And so nobody's asking these type of questions.
So you're basically saying that the e-levy is a wrong diagnosis
of a problem.
It would, I think we are hoping to raise over $1 billion. You don't think they can raise that?
No, they can't raise the $1.15 billion because the way in which they are anticipating the exemptions to work does not anticipate behavioral changes to fit in the exemptions.
So people will rebel.
They will find all manner of ways to game the system.
So don't raise the $1 billion.
No, because as soon as it becomes significant, that means that the cost is being felt in the economy. People will find ways around, and we've seen it in many countries. Don't forget that e-levy is not anything novel. The Kenyans have been doing that on this. We are trying to put it on both the fees and the transactions. The Ugandans have been doing it now for 3.5 years. Uganda is making about $27 million a year from it, roughly. And if you adjust for our size, which is bigger than Uganda by 5 or something times in terms of scale and value, and you adjust for the fact that their rate is lower because when they did it at, they initially tried to push it at 2%, there was war in Kampala and the government had to retreat back.
So you are saying that the amount we are raising we are proposing to regulate. But you're also saying
if you adjust that, you're going to get maybe $400 million.
Yeah, but beyond that, you're saying that there could even be a deformalization of the digital sector.
If you don't design it right. And to design it right, it can't be something that somebody sits in the finance ministry, announces it, and then every MP just lines up to go and vote for it. There must be debate within the NPP itself about its design. That's how you can't go to the US, implement a radical policy change, and expect that every Republican congressman and every Republican senator will just line up and they themselves have to look at it and say,
so you think there's a misunderstanding of what you call the digital business progression?
Yes, because what it is that how you become a formalized economy in the digital realm is different from in the traditional realm because of all the intermediary stages.
So in the chart you show, the traditional business progression is basically from informal to formal. But for digital, you have about 10 steps?
Yes, multiple steps around identity because you have an identity mechanism. So you have situations where somebody may be just a freelancer, so he's just doing micro work, but notwithstanding the fact that he's just a freelancer and doing micro work, because of the fact that it's digital, the traditional anonymization is removed. And therefore, he's partially formal. So there are a lot of partial.
So from social media, mobile money, license and permits, all the way to income tax.
Indeed, and I was just hoping that you could project
we put it up. I will put it up. So you're basically saying that if the design of the e-levy doesn't think about all of this and is just thinking about assuming we can raise a certain amount of money, not only will we fail to raise the money, it can actually reduce our rate of formalizing the economy.
Exactly, because in the digital segment. Rather than encouraging people to do more online, so I buy the item but I pay online the rest, you encourage what currently happens. People don't want to pay online because they don't trust a bunch of things, right? So they say, I place the order, but when you come, then I give you cash. Have you observed that there's a lot of that in the delivery ecosystem, the e-logistics ecosystem?
Yes.
That is not full formalization.
A lot of the drivers say, I want cash, I don't want.
Yes, that's one. There's also the pay on delivery. They don't want to pay until you bring it to them. Now, before you change behavior, you want people to be highly driven by the convenience factor and the low cost factor so that they overcome their trust issues. Because the reason why they do that is a lot of it is trust issues.
So e-levy will destroy that?
It might, if you don't design it properly.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll look at other things. So apart from all the big programs, there's also attempts to promote digital entrepreneurship. I think 2 weeks ago, the government spoke about the technology in agric or something, and there's a lot of programs they've launched. We'll try and analyze some of that. This is the point of view. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still on the point of view assessing the digitalization agenda championed by the Vice President. Vice Simmons is my guest. Okay, what about entrepreneurial support programs? The government has tried to do a lot of things in that space. I think 2 weeks ago they did something in agric, tech in agric or something. And there's always these monies for people to do kinds of things. Have you analyzed that? Obviously, that should be a fair
there's been some studies on that. I mean, the country diagnostic, the formal country diagnostic takes note of the incoherence among the programs. So we have about 40 youth entrepreneurship, employment schemes that are all supposed to be correlated but are not well correlated. And then within that, about 22 of them are tilted towards digital. So roughly 22 of them are tilted towards digital. And if you've projected...
Yes, so we have it. So we have the Girls in ICT, Startup Ghana, ODMET, NEIP, incubation programs,
different incubating programs. Some
Youth
of them
in ICT, NEIP, YE, E-Transform, EDC. There's quite a bit of this.
There's quite a bit of it. And then what you realize in most of these situations is that you come against this inability for the government to be internally critical. So you say, okay, the Auditor General does a number of performance reviews. A lot of the policies in this country don't undergo any serious performance reviews. Once in a while, the Auditor General, in doing financial control, decide to do a bit of performance reviews. We don't really know whether any of these programs are yielding any benefits to the economy. From what we can tell, by failure rates, etc., the little sampling that has happened, most of these startups that are giving support are not the ones that today are raising millions of dollars around the world that we hear about, or even the ones that local venture capitalists are putting in money. So somehow, when the government chooses who benefits, it does such a bad job that most of the success stories that we are seeing are those that actually avoid the government's programs, which is frightening. So if you go to MEST or you go to Y Combinator, you go to 500 Startups or any of these premium places where they incubate these startups to greatness, and you look at the ones that have raised money, the ones that have expanded, the ones that are employing people, you don't see represented in them players that came through the government support programs. That's frightening.
Over which period?
Over the last decade that we've seen.
Wow.
So you say, okay, so who are these people that they are giving all this money to? One time we tried to look at some of the payment rates, because some of these things are designed like
paying
loans.
back. How much they pay? Repayments, yeah.
Repayment rates. And we said, okay, let's just look at the most recent one, because that one, literally, they should have started paying by now because the grace period is over for the first set of recipients, those that received their money in 2020 under the COVID programs. So the ones that Ghana Enterprise Agency is responsible for handing the money out to. When we checked, and we very discreetly checked, because obviously they won't give you the information, right? We very discreetly checked. Repayments are following the same trend as we've seen with Maslock, NAPE. They don't pay the money back. The equity that the government is supposed to hold properly, there's no SPV that holds the equity. So we are throwing a lot of money around, but it's not clear to us that there's a well thought through process, even to measure whether or not these monies are having a real impact.
Wow.
And that's a problem.
Is this also under the government's digital agenda? Or this is because some of this is employment creation, some of this is under Ministry of Finance.
That's a good point.
So it may not be fair to put all of this under a digital.
So this connects to the third level of the analysis, that luckily you have given us some little time to kind of delve into, which is the lost promise or the unmet promise of the lost potential or the unmet promise of this whole administration. So if you look at a place like Accra Digital Center, 2011, Rockefeller, World Bank gives us $10 million. I think we managed to withdraw down about $8.3 million. We set it up. We get a bunch of warehouses. We try to change it. It takes a while to operationalize. A new government comes into power. They operationalize it. And it's supposed to be a BPO center. I'm trying to link this to
business process outsourcing.
Now, the BPO and the information technology enabled services space are connected. And the primary goal, if you're building a BPO center in your country, is that you are following the path that others like the Philippines, India, and the rest have followed, where you are able to export ICT service and get foreign exchange. So that then very much ties into your economic strategy, because we really want to boost exports, right? And we don't only want to boost exports, we want to boost exports that increases our local value addition, where we have people that have skills and they are doing adding value to other people's processes. Since 2015, when ACS withdrew, we've seen significant reduction in outputs in BPO in Ghana, and therefore ICT exports are also dropping accordingly, or at the very least are very fragile and very episodic. So in that respect, you say, okay, you go to a place like Accra Digital Center, and now they want to multiply by almost 16. They want to put it in every region. And we say, well, what was the primary strategy? The primary strategy was BPO. Today it has become a kind of glorified condo renting facility. People are just there renting facility, doing any kind of business. Very little of that is tied in to creating the digital entrepreneurship ecosystem, because most of the startups that have been admitted there are those that can pay the rent, and very little of that is tied to the BPO agenda for which it was built. So the idea was that you get the New York Police Department, they send you all their images for annotation. Because of that, we train people in machine learning in Ghana.
To do that and send it back.
Because we add value in the initially. Initially, you start with just data entry. And then because of the fact that you have the relationship, we add the machine learning. And startups that are in machine learning can then become suppliers to the BPO provider. And you create an ecosystem.
So that has not been done?
None of that has happened. In fact, BPO services are actually declining in terms of total output. Call center facilities were supposed to be the people that others outsource their call center to. Recently, I just found out that my bank has outsourced its call center to India from Ghana. So more and more, rather than we becoming an outsourcing destination, companies are outsourcing processes outside. I know companies now that are using accounting service in the Philippines, etc., because the BPO
so that promise
strategy
has not been realized.
could not be realized.
What about things like one teacher, one laptop? Now, the vice president was at a program where he wants to do one student, one laptop. Obviously, that's a good thing, isn't it?
No, often the intentions can never be questioned, right? Because the intentions often follow from broadly understood principles in digital development around the world. So get teachers mobile devices that help them with their teaching, eventually get students. I don't know if you remember the one laptop per child. The problem has always been that and here it's a recurring theme. The problem has always been that rather than the thing being done in good faith, you have a lot of procurement drivers. That then leads to contradictions. So you go and do a one laptop per teacher program in partnership with the unions, and then it turns out that you choose a company that has no history whatsoever producing devices. A company that nobody can point to and say, here are the executives, here are who they are, and what.
So you think the procurement objective is what defeats this technology?
It is a sign. It's a sign that often it's not fundamental policy that somebody is changing. They are rather riding on the narrative to do their own thing. So the vice president elevates this to a certain stature. So anybody at all says, oh, it's part of the government's digitization agenda, right? And then all of a sudden you create procurement opportunities.
So what should he do? What should the government do?
I think the vice president should be very careful about his image and its association with these types of failures. We shouldn't have a one laptop per teacher program where the computers are so bad that every teacher that is critical is able to say, we didn't ask you to take money from our allowances and use it to buy this laptop. The laptop has 1 gigahertz speed. I mean, all of these bad
it's not good
feedback is not helpful. And it can actually undermine the whole notion of a digitization agenda.
So you're saying beyond laptop, whatever, you're basically saying that there's also underutilized capacity or some sort of you call unfulfilled promise in the technology space. What do you mean?
I've felt that one of the biggest issues we need to tackle is the way in which the digitization agenda becomes a narrative that people write to spend large amounts of money that don't return the degree to make, that doesn't generate the returns that you will expect given the amount that has been spent. So you're looking at e-procurement, for instance, right? And not too long ago, we decided to spend $5 million on e-procurement. Remember, the head of the procurement agency was found collecting kickbacks in sacks, literally. So that's how bad the situation is. The very head of the procurement agency was found taking kickbacks in sacks, cash, and then putting them into bank accounts. Now, if your situation is this bad and this desperate, and you decide to spend $5 million to fix it, how do you create a national e-procurement system where only 2 ongoing tenders are visible, only 1 advertised tender?
Are you serious?
Yes.
So when we go to GANEPS,
go to the Ghana National E-Procurement platform now and look at the output for $5 million.
Okay, so there are 2 projects. The tender number 1, construction of number 3.
Projects in Atiwa. You are literally talking about Frimpong, Atiwa East District, and then construction of another. Yeah. So this is what is visible. This is all the portal allows you to achieve. If you are interested in looking at current tenders, what tenders are in the public sector, so that you can apply, this is what you get.
Seriously?
Seriously. After $5 million and a lot of fanfare.
How long has this been on?
This has been going on from 2019. They were supposed to have launched in 2019. You know.
So only 2 projects are visible?
Only 2 projects are available.
Or 2 tenders?
2 tenders. And only 1 advertisement. So in essence, you have a situation where they make commitments to use technology to change things that we all accept are very bad. Like bad procurement or corruption. And so we're going to use technology to fix single sourcing. And then you go back and you look at it and they've done nothing whatsoever to fix single sourcing. Most projects are still single sourced. There is still no information available on them on the electronic websites. You know, we spend $100 million on e-justice. You still go to the courts and you want document. You still have to apply manually to the registrar, the registry, and get it from the registrar.
So your argument is that they spend money on the project, but they are not committed to delivery.
We spent $100 million on GIFMIS. We spent even more on HRMIs. We spent more on Hyperion. We have spent more, after all of that, we still spend money on the electronic salary payment voucher system. And yet still, some people, it takes as much as 2 years to put them on the payroll. We have teachers in this country whose arrests, dating back as far back as 2012, have still not been resolved. So our argument is that given how much we are spending on these projects, tens of millions of dollars, we should focus on these very critical issues. If I'm employed as a nurse, it shouldn't take 6 months, 1 year for me to start getting my first salary. When you are digitizing the payroll system. Otherwise, what's the point of digitization when ordinary people cannot feel in their lives real transformation? How can we say there's national transformation based on digitization When the ordinary person has to wait 6 months before they get their fair salary because it takes that long to enroll. Why? Because you centralize all the enrollment capacity in Accra with these technologies, and then when you get into the school, they don't even have a basic system to speed up enrollment. And then instead of solving that, you create a whole new project called electronic salary payment voucher that just benefited a private provider and did very little to change the enrollment mechanisms at the level of the school. And then when you want to make changes, you then try and impose a vendor on the system. So right now, for instance, the Ministry of Communications is trying to force all the universities to adopt a learning management software that is procuring from someone that nobody knows. The Ministry of Health is trying to force all hospitals in Ghana to use one software platform for electronic health records from a vendor that is not better than the vendors that have already deployed these solutions. In fact, it's so bad, they are trying to force solutions that have already been deployed in the hospitals, in some of the universities. They want to force them out and bring in their preferred vendor. What kind of digitalization is that?
And is all this within something that a champion like the vice president should be able to?
Exactly. So what we are saying is that in order not to lose credibility, in order that this doesn't become something that begins to tarnish your brand, he should recenter the focus on actual policy deliverables. That means simply taking the projects, doing rigorous monitoring, making sure stakeholders are in the room. So for instance, if you are doing a project that is related to digitization of hospitals, you cannot do that without a GMA, all of these people in the room asking hard questions. My argument is that far too often, these projects are designed and implemented with nobody critical enough in the room to ask serious questions.
Aren't we giving too much responsibility to somebody like the vice president? Because you do know that in governments, they are not that powerful.
So the argument is that if he really, really cares about this digitization thing, then he should refocus his mind on the real issues on the ground and address them head on. Not just try and milk it for political capital, because it will backfire. If he tries that, it will backfire because of all the problematic things we are observing on the ground. So that's advice that is coming very much from people on the ground in this sector who are worried about so many challenges across the board. In every part that you look, you have serious problems that have to be fixed. When we decided to do e-levy, GIFS has all the capacity to do any reconciliation if ever we decide to do e-levy. What was it about now putting aside millions of dollars for some other company to come in and do verification and reconciliation and the rest of that? So we have to be careful, because otherwise people are going to wake up to the fact that most of these things are merely lining up the pockets of well-connected bureaucrats, well-connected business people, and achieving no transformation on the ground. That's our concern.
I'm sure we'll have more time to chat. Thank you for talking to us. Happy New Year to you. That's all we have time for today. We're trying to get into the digital agenda of the government, looking at some of the Vice President's initiatives. We haven't done an exhaustive analysis, but I'm sure the chips are there for you to see. We'll see you next time with another program. The Business Dashboard is next. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.